Hi, Carol. Is that you? Can you hear me? Oh, I think I see that you're muted, so I can't hear you unless you unmute yourself. Uh-oh. Now I see she is not there. Let's see. Number, 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 number. Now I can hear you. Is that you, Carol?
Yes, every time I click on something to do with the mic, it sends me away and I can't get out of it, so I had to have that down.
Ah, okay. Well, how you been? I haven't seen you in a long time.
I know. Well, I retired from school counseling and then started in private practice very slowly, and now I'm working as an independent in a group in Houston, and things are looking good.
Very cool. Very cool. How's the private practice going?
It's going well. I'm still what you would consider part-time, but I'm on a number of insurance panels. I'm hoping that it'll increase. I'm kind of the new kid on the block at the retirement age type of combination.
Very cool. Well, if you need any help, let me know. It's starting practice is hard, and I've done it thousands of times. It seems like, but it's a lot of fun, and being able to work with and attract couples into your practice will be a huge help.
Yes, in fact, I've just been, watching all of your newsletters and been seeing some
I think
interested in that.
I think something might be wrong with your micro. Something might be wrong with your.
A workshop and things like that that they do. It's a couple thing you did I couldn't attend for some conflict. So.
Oh, I think something might be wrong because I hear a lot of static when you talk now. Let me see.
I'm looking for volume settings here. I've got it full up on the website.
Okay, whatever it was, I heard you just fine there.
Okay. Yeah, you're a little soft for me, but
Oh, maybe is that better?
marginally.
I have, I have kind of a. Is that any better?
Yeah, that is better.
Ah, look at that. All right, I have to be mindful because I have such a soft voice. Uh, that I have to be aware. But yeah, I was in Houston last year, and I actually was hoping I'd get a chance to see you there. I remembered you lived in Houston, but I know that you guys are all very busy, and you know things kind of things kind of come up. And we just had somebody else jump on the call from New Jersey.
Oh well.
Hello, is that Mindy from New Jersey? Let me see. I can see her, and I hope that she can hear us. We've got people that are planning to log in really from all over the world. Somebody from Moscow, the Netherlands, London, England. So we'll give them a couple more minutes to kind of sign in. Um, and then we'll get started going over the content for today's workshop, which is going to be like opening up a session with couples using uh, solution building language and the solution focused approach. So while I just have minimal people, what are you guys hoping to get from attending this webinar? Like, what are your best hopes from this talk we're about to have?
I guess for me, I've seen the solution focused working with individuals, but haven't really seen any, live examples of working with couples. So my mind is completely open.
Well, very good, because I am going to show you me working with a couple. So for those of you on the phone, I hope you're on an iPhone where you can see it, but you'll certainly be able to hear it. So, but I'm going to show a video of me working with a couple. It's a session I did, I guess, just under a year ago or so, and I think it's a really good example because one of uh, the gentleman in the session, you'll see in a very short amount of time the way that the using solution building language impacted him and the role that that played in the subsequent therapy. And at least for the next couple of months, we'll go through this particular tape, or maybe even some more tapes. I try to record at least one session a week. Sometimes I'm not able to. Sometimes it ends up being one session a month. But I like to record a lot for two main reasons. Number one, um, when I do a lot of recording, I get to watch myself, and there's no better methodology of providing feedback than when you can do it in real time. Uh, just learning from your own use of language and what you're doing in a session clinically. And the other reason is because I do a lot of trainings these days and having lots of examples. I think the best way to learn these therapy approaches is for people to be able to see exactly what it is you're talking about and see yourself using them. I think it's pretty cool. So I'm going to talk a little bit about, and if you guys have seen my YouTube videos, some of this stuff will be repeated, but I think it's important to drive home the points on how to open up a session using solution building language. And then I'm going to show you the first probably about 4 minutes of the tape that I was just referring to with a couple by the name of Dave and Celeste. And then I'll probably be stopping the tape at different points to highlight a few things. And then we will have a little bit of a discussion and give people the opportunity to ask questions and see where we go from there. And I don't know, I'm expecting maybe 45 minutes, an hour. Just we'll see how long the discussion goes. You guys have a function on your screens where you can raise your hand. And I really want you to use that. If at any point you have a question, I'm about to put everybody on mute, so as people jump in, they don't. There's no, side noise or anything like that. But if there's any point where you have a question, please, please, please push the function to raise your hand, which I think if you're on the phone, that would be *6. And if you're on the computer, there is a button there where you can raise your hand. And I really, really, really want you guys to use that so we can make the best of our time and ask good questions and really learn. So how about we go ahead and get started? So I am going.
Can I ask you, is there any other setting I should be on right now? I just see the title.
No, you're fine. If you just see the title, I haven't put anything up there differently yet. So you should see
Okay,
you
but I don't see that. I see chat, but I don't see a hand.
next to your name in the chat. There should be a function there that says raise your hand.
Okay, I don't see my name either, and I'm a little.
Oh,
I'm just trying to figure out how this works. I just have monthly webinar, in the middle with the picture of the grass.
right. Blah, 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 blah. I should. I'm looking at a different screen. I'm looking at the presenter screen, so I don't know that I'm much help.
There's something called My Mood. I don't know if somebody
Yes,
else
it's
has
actually
that
it's
trick.
it's in my mood. It is in my mood.
Oh, got it. Got it. Okay.
Got it? All right.
Got it.
All right, so I'm about to mute everyone and I'll start blah blah blah. Where is it? Okay, so everybody now is muted and we will start going over. You might want to get a piece of paper, potentially take some notes, but we will start going over establishing the beginning of a solution building session. Let's see if my coffee is cool enough for me to drink. I recently started drinking coffee, but nobody warned me that it was a diuretic, and I frequently have to run to the bathroom, which is an odd problem for a couples therapist to have, if you can imagine. Okay, so as most of you know, solution-focused therapy is it's about building the solution as opposed to just solving the problem or a particular problem. And you know, I've had many people tell me that they struggle with the word solution focus because, in all honesty, aren't we all focusing on solutions and trying to accomplish solutions? And I heard many people in the solution focused community even describe this as a bad name for what we do. And me and some colleagues, one particular named Adam Frower in Chicago, we were really kind of talking about that about a year ago. And we decided that a better name for what we do is solution building. And that led to the title of my book. At the time of that conversation, I was writing the book that came out last fall called Solution Building in Couples Therapy, um, because it's a very different approach to engaging people, and in this particular case, couples, in conversations. And the first step in this approach is what we call establishing a destination. Now, my favorite way, the most frequent way that I will open up a session is by asking the very simple question, what are your best hopes from this workshop or from this session? What are your best hopes from this conversation? Which is very different than what are the best hopes for your relationship. The focus is always on the conversation that you're going to have with your couples. So it's not what are the best hopes for your relationship, but it's what are your best hopes from this conversation? What do you hope to gain as a result of us having this conversation? And it establishes an immediate goal for the conversation, and it gives us a destination with which we are seeking. And like I said, I'm about to show you an example of Dave and Celeste, which, by the way, ends up being a really good example because that's an odd question. When couples come into the office and they sit down and I say, what are your very best hopes from this conversation? That's a question that most people hadn't heard before, and very frequently people ask me to repeat it, or I can see them kind of uh, I don't want to use the word struggling, but I can see them processing with exactly how to answer that question because most therapy is about, excuse me, what brought you here today. And this approach is so different. We're so much more interested in what do you hope happens in this conversation so that you will feel like it has been useful to you. When you're working with couples, each partner has to contribute. So even, uh, and you'll see in this tape as well, that you have two different communication styles when you work with couples frequently. So when I ask that question, what are your very best hopes from this conversation? Each couple, each partner must take their turn to contributing what their best hope is for the conversation. And it's important to use that phrasing, what are your best hopes? People ask me a lot, like, why that exact question? Well, the answer is very simple. Because I do want to know what people hope for, but I noticed that if I ask people what they hope for, I'll get a minimalistic answer. So, what do you hope for this conversation? People say, "Well, we just want to stop fighting again," or "We just want to get along." But I actually want people to go beyond that. I want people to think really, really big. Look, what's the best potential outcome as a result of this conversation? And then we get answers like, I want to fall in love again. I want this relationship to go back to the way it was. If this conversation could help us reconnect. Like, those are the answers that a solution building couples therapist is going to be more interested in. And it focuses on the presence of something. So it's about something occurring as opposed to something not occurring. as a solution building couples therapist, we believe a lot that the more people have of what they're desirous of, then the less they will have of what they're undesirous of. So the less potential problems you can have if you have lots and lots of solutions taking place. And a problem description is not required. And in fact, it's kind of a detriment. When you're working with couples, it's almost like I'm in a race to start the solution building process with the potential problem. Uh, I saw a couple the other day for the book I'm actually writing right now. I kind of use them as an example in the book. But I saw a couple the other day that was divorced. They'd been divorced for 3 years, but something made them start to consider, should we come back to a relationship or not? And the first thing they thought was, let's go into therapy. Now, what caused them to get a divorce was the man had had an affair, and because the woman felt like that was so unfair, she then had an affair. And there was just a lot of hurt. Now the kids are grown for this particular couple, and they decided to just give it one more shot to see if they should get back together. And I asked this couple, what are your best hopes from this conversation? And I could see such a strong presence of hurt, but there was also a very strong presence of positive feelings about these people. And my job as a therapist, in my opinion, is to ask questions that bring about those positive feelings, that bring them up to the surface so that people can experience more of that and see what happens to the relationship. Um, after at the end of that session, the husband said to me that they hadn't talked like that in years, and it's all as a result of asking these questions, starting with, "What are your very best hopes from the conversation?" That couple had no clue that we were going to have a conversation like that. They were just hoping that they could leave this session getting along because they hadn't in so long. They spent that session describing to me what they would like their relationship to look like, and then as a result left the session and went on a date. Now I hadn't seen them again yet. We've only met one time, but it was such a different experience for that couple, and it all starts with, what are your best hopes? Um, it's about what the couple wants, as I just mentioned, and not what they don't want. In that case, that couple would have said, we don't want to fight, we don't want to argue. But as they were answering questions, things came out. Like she said that she wants to have that feeling again that she used to have when she looked at him. Well, normally that would have been phrased like, I don't feel the same about you. But this time she said, I want it back to have it again, which the husband heard very differently. He heard it as good news. He was excited. He was drastically impacted by her using that statement, and it allowed him to respond in ways that allowed her to feel better. Because then he was able to say, I want to be able to hold your hand again, instead of saying, I can't even hold your hand again, which might trigger an argument. And the conversation built and went on that way. And it was such a drastic experience for this particular couple. Like, it makes me excited. The reason I got into doing this work is because I believe that our love and our relationships are more powerful than we allow them to be. And I've never seen anything like what solution focused therapy, and in particular solution building language, can do with couples. Now, we're all aware, or most people are aware of the way that solution focused therapy works with individuals. But when I began applying this work with couples, I was just amazed at what I saw happening in sessions. So that was just a quick little, brief description of the opening part of the session. I'm going to open this up for. Okay, so I'm going to open the discussion up. If you guys have any questions about what I just said before I share this piece of videotape. So is there anybody who has a question? If you're on the phone, push *6. If you have a question, or if you're on the computer, you can go into mood and raise your hand and pose your question if you had any thoughts. All right, very good. Well, it looks like there are no questions, so I'm just going to play the video. I may pause it at different points. I'm going to leave it in discussion mode. Really, I'm going to leave it in discussion mode for the remainder of our call here. So if there's anything in the session that you would like me to address, or if you have any questions about what was said, absolutely anything at all, just raise your hand and I can pause the video very easily and address your question. I'm not going to give you guys any background information because when I went into the session, I had absolutely no information about these two people, as is common for me, as I like. Um, I very much like to know as little as possible so I can be as curious as possible when I work with couples. But um, you'll see an interesting kind of dynamic taking place. And again, I'm probably going to let this tape run for, I don't know, 2, 3, maybe 4 minutes, but we'll see. Here, I'll pause it there. But I'll start with Dave. Did you guys notice in Dave's response? So I asked him what are his best hopes, and Dave's first response was about the absence of a problem, to not get divorced. And then he made a very particular, which is going to become really important as the session unfolds. He made a request that was a result of some very hurtful things that had happened between him and Celeste, and he said not to get a divorce and her to put her wedding ring back on. Um, but neither of those are truly the answers that I'm looking for when I'm asking that question. So I had to kind of rephrase it a little, with which he said, well, he'd like to be happy. And I wanted a little bit of specificity about happy. I said, what do you do when you're happy? He gave me another not answer. He said, I'm not pissed. I said, instead of pissed, you would be. And then he started giving answers that would allow me to use them. And when I say use them, is throughout the conversation, throughout the later conversation with this couple, I'm going to be building questions based upon this answer, which is why we call it a destination. Because I'm going to be building questions based upon the answer that they gave so that we can get to the outcome that this particular couple is looking for. And then also you can see the difference in communication styles. When I asked Celeste this question, Celeste is much slower, um, uh, much more, I don't know, I'm trying to think of the word, but she's more deliberate in her answers. And she's also less hopeful. I mean, Celeste, this session was triggered by Dave. It was initiated by Dave, and Celeste is the potential couple that you would see, whereas one partner isn't as in as the other partner. And Celeste is kind of checked out a little bit and alludes to that by saying, um, I'm not feeling very hopeful right now. But I'm gonna jump ahead here because I want to show you guys just how what noticing the positive and eliciting strengths does, and pay very close attention to something Celeste says. Probably in about 2 or 3 minutes. So I'm going to let it run for about 2 or 3 more minutes. And so you just heard Celeste say, I'm not feeling very hopeful right now. The next step in a solution building conversation, which um, we're really going to hone in on and highlight at next month's webinar, I don't know why that's so hard for me to say, um, is called establishing a connection or problem-free talk. So as we enter into this phase of the conversation, at the end of it, I want you to pay really close attention to what Celeste says. Given what you already know about her, she started off by saying, I'm not very hopeful right now. I want you to watch this interaction and watch how Celeste shifts. Now, it may sound like, I'm going to pause just for a second because I want to kind of point you guys to something, but it may sound like we're just kind of chatting or having a superficial conversation. But this might be, now we're only 3 minutes and 13 seconds into the conversation, and this very well may be the most important interaction in the conversation. And I am working really, really hard because I'm trying to collect information that's going to help me build meaningful questions later on in the session. So, as I'm listening to these responses, like when I asked if they had any children, and she said yes, Zoe, and she's 5, I now know that Zoe is now someone that I could ask third party questions. What would Zoe notice as your relationship begins to shift more into positive, so on and so on and so on. So even though it sounds very superficial or it sounds like we're just having a chat, I'm actually working extremely hard and I'm causing myself to get to know them beyond their problem, which is going to make me like them. And we work harder for people that we like. And I'm going to give them the opportunity in a second to ask me questions because I, in turn, think it's respectful that they should get the opportunity to know me. And I'd like them to like me if possible so that they could work harder to ask my questions. These are very unusual questions, and their ability to like me and thus work harder to answer them is going to benefit the whole process. But again, I want you to pay attention to Celeste. As I've begun asking these questions, I think people pick up on the fact that I'm not asking questions like who cheated and why did you cheat and what were the problems in the relationships that led to that action and all those things. This is such a different experience that it has a drastic impact on people, and Celeste is going to highlight that for us in a second. By the way, something else. Dave is about to ask me a question that no one has ever asked me before, and it makes me so nervous. You know, um, in this day and age of the internet, people come to my sessions aware that I teach and write about this solution focused approach, and they can research what solution focused therapy is. But watch, I mean, we're now, we're 4 minutes, almost 5 minutes into the conversation. And I don't know if you can see it on the videotape, or for those of you on the phone, I don't know if you can hear it, but the mood has shifted quite a bit. And even if you look at the faces on the screen, it's softer, it's gentler, it's more connected in a way. And Dave's about to kind of test me a little. So, um, Dave asked me, what is this form of therapy that I teach? Which, to be perfectly honest, people asked me before, what is this solution focused stuff? How is it different than other sessions? My wife and I, my husband and I have been to other therapy. How is this different? These are questions I've heard before. No one's ever asked me, have you used it on yourself? And I really didn't know how to respond. Like, I was really taken aback by it. And I repeated the question really as a way of buying myself time to think of a way to respond. Um, but as I answered it, I noticed Celeste becoming more engaged. I don't know if you guys could see that. And then she made a face, and I asked, "Are you guys okay to go through with this?" And Celeste now says, I don't know if you could hear her, she said it quite softly, but Celeste now says, "I'll try anything." Now, we're almost 6 minutes into the conversation, and the very first thing she said was, "I don't have that much hope." But 6 minutes later, after hearing what we had been doing and hearing more about the solution focused approach and what she was about to experience in couples therapy, she now says maybe the most hopeful sentence she could say, which is, "I'll try anything." And I really like this little clip because it highlights just how powerful hope and optimism are when they're injected into a conversation like this. It was just, as a therapist sitting with them, it was an unbelievable experience. And I was so glad to have it on tape so people could see when you inject hope and optimism into a conversation, this is the outcome that you get. And one of the things that led to me writing about using this approach with couples and training it was it became very hard to describe to people what was actually happening in my office. Um, and lots of couples approaches are effective. Obviously there's Sue Johnson's EFT and John Gottman's Gottman method and all of those things. But what I was seeing with couples was so different and so dynamic. Um, it was just incredible. And I could argue that in these 6 minutes, we've done significant therapeutic work. And I really hadn't done the most important part of the solution focused approach, which would be describing your preferred future. And all we've really done is kind of change the mood in the session and gotten to know each other a little bit. And that alone has had an impact on them. I strongly suspect that if at this point in the session, let's say in my office building, this session was actually taped in my Dallas office where I work about once a week or so, as opposed to my Keller office where I basically live here in Keller, Texas. But I would argue that if in that building a fire alarm went off and the couple and the session had the end right there, that they would have experienced a positive experience just from that 6 minutes. So I wonder if you guys have any questions or thoughts about this. Um, I'm going to leave the video paused. I probably won't change it. But you guys are in discussion mode, so if you have any questions or comments, I would be very interested to hear them. Again, I think it's so important to be able to see uh, therapy taking place. I think it's so important to be able to listen to the actual session so we can get feedback and understanding in real time. So, I want you guys to feel comfortable asking any question whatsoever if you want to know why I said what I said or why I did what I did um, or anything about that therapy interaction that you just saw. So I guess now I'll shut up and see if anybody has any questions. And again, it's *6 if you're on the phone or in the computer. Just go into my mood, and then there's a thing there that says raise hand. Okay, I see somebody's hand, and I'm gonna unmute. Carol, you are unmuted.
Yeah, I'll just go for it, Elliott. After the workshops that I attended, I think this approach is described as very simple conceptually, but very difficult to do.
Yes.
And for me, the hardest part is maintaining. I understand it intellectually, and I see exactly what you did, but seeing what you did and doing it yourself are two different things. And
Yes.
to me, I guess it's the tech, it's the destination, I guess, or maybe the map where you're going. That's going to. I guess I really need to see more of the session to see how it unfolds.
Yeah, we can do
It's
that.
very helpful, but I just remember that it was difficult to maintain, not difficult to initiate, but difficult to maintain.
Sure, sure. It is very difficult to maintain. I think you're quite accurate in describing. I've heard many people, and in fact, I agree that solution focused therapy is so simple that it's complicated. And you know what? That's probably a good idea. I'll probably let the session run a little bit more, so you'll see the way that I'm maintaining the conversation and how tempting it is to get invited into problem talk and how I have to keep building questions that lead in this direction. And don't feel too, if you're doing it with your own couples, it is hard to do, but it's just like a muscle. It's like imagine doing sit ups. If you went to the gym after never going to the gym ever and the trainer said do 500 sit ups, you couldn't do it, but you have to kind of build the ability. You have to work that muscle out. And in couples therapy, you have to work that muscle out just the same. Dave is going to give me lots of invitations into problem talk. Dave says things like, "Did you hear what he said when I said about my wedding ring?" He said, "Well, she couldn't wear her wedding ring," which could have turned into a problem kind of talk conversation and kind of removed the work that we had done up until that point. Um, but he didn't, or I didn't accept the invitation. Couples give you lots of invitations to start doing things like teaching them how to communicate well and the 5 steps to building intimacy and all of that stuff. But I just noticed when you work with couples, they either they don't respond well to didactic teaching. Like they don't respond well to being told like this is how to communicate, use of I statements and all of those things. And when the ideas and answers come from them, our natural ability to build a relationship comes into play. And with Dave and Celeste, they had already built a relationship, so I don't feel like it's my job to be able to teach them. So, Carol, how about we do that? How about I let the video run a little bit so you'll see the conversation unfolding and watch specifically Dave giving me some opportunities to start talking about the problem, and then me giving them an invitation to stay in what Bill O'Hanlon calls solution land. So
Sounds great.
here we go. Awesome. I'm gonna pause it really quick. Also to highlight something Carol was just mentioning. The question that I just asked seems so simple, but I want to tell you why it's so important and how it helps the conversation continue to flow. When when I ask couples how they meet, the very interesting thing is, it's really difficult to do therapy with two people that are very angry and very hurt. Even if the anger and hurt is understandable, anger is almost like being intoxicated with alcohol. We wouldn't do therapy with people that are intoxicated, and I don't want to do therapy with people that are intoxicated with anger either. So, the reason this question is so powerful is imagine someone asking you, and I just had this experience. Easter was yesterday, and I was listening to old, like I guess what kids these days would call oldies, as I was driving around Alexandria, Louisiana with my wife's family. And I have a nephew that's about 7. And we were listening to a song that came on by some group that was performing in the 80s, to be honest. I don't even remember who the group was. And the song came on, and my nephew asked me, when did this song come out? Now, in order for me to answer that question, I kind of had to close my eyes and transport myself back into the time where this song was relevant in my life. And it happened to be my senior year in high school, which I know was 1994. And I turned to my nephew and I said, "Oh, it came out in 1994." And there was an instant burst of like positive feelings because my brain kind of took me back to 1994 just to answer that one simple question. And in order to keep a conversation like this going, one thing that must take place is the couple has to be able to envision themselves positively, which most couples have lost the ability to do. So when I ask people how they met, in order for them to answer that question, they have to transport themselves back to the times when they met and be able to describe the relationship at that point in great detail. And you can already see the look on Celeste's face kind of softening quite a bit. You can see the look on Dave's face. Everything is softer, and they're going to start describing to me the process of their meeting. And in order for me to keep this conversation going, I've got to have a way of inviting them to be that couple as opposed to the couple that was hurt and angry of recent times. I've got to have a way of inviting them to be the couple that met and fell in love so that I can do therapy with that particular couple. And the way that I do it is by asking people how they met. So, Carol, do you see how I'm asking these questions, kind of getting at and driving at um, the specific details of how this couple got together? And as a result of doing that, the tone is continuously shifting. So he starts saying things like there was a chemistry. So you build a question, how did you know that that chemistry was present? And then she becomes to get more engaged and starts describing these positive feelings as well. And just 8 minutes ago, she was describing herself as hopeless. So now, in a couple of minutes, which we're probably not going to get to today, um, she's gonna when I start doing the meat, the really essence of solution focused therapy, when I start asking them tomorrow questions and having them describe their future, I'm doing it to this couple. I'm doing it to the couple that has been viscerally experiencing the beginning, those positive feelings, and quite honestly, things that we don't often experience. The things that we don't often talk about, the beginning of a relationship, and especially in this amount of detail. And they're different. They're totally, totally different people. And it makes the flow of the conversation so much more succinct, so much clearer, so much cleaner, and so much more able for me as a therapist to be able to build these questions and have the conversation continue to flow. I hope that makes some sense. Um, so, Carol, do you have or Carol or anyone else? I'll unmute Carol once again. So, Carol, does that make sense?
Yes, it does. I'm wondering how do you see this working, or what is your experience working when one of the couple has had an affair?
Um, I see it working. It works just the same no matter what the problem is because the problem doesn't have the ability to come into the session. Now, I can honestly tell you with Dave and Celeste, I don't know if one of them had an affair or not. Because as you can tell, we've just watched the beginning part of the session, which is usually when couples start unloading what the problem was or what went wrong, and we don't have any idea what was wrong, what's gone wrong in this relationship, right? But very obviously, significant clinical work has taken place, and I don't have any idea what what has gone awry between Dave and Celeste. I know that what comes out later is they just grew apart, and Dave spends a lot of time working and traveling doing comedy. But at no point do they say that an affair did or did not happen. But trust is important in this conversation. They do talk about rebuilding trust. And a traditional couples therapist might say, what happened to destroy trust and how do you regain trust back and teach Dave or Celeste what steps are needed to regain trust. But in solution focused therapy, we just talk about the presence of trust. You see what I'm saying? And there are lots of times when I work with couples, there are lots and lots of times when I work with couples, and I can tell an affair has happened, but I have no way of knowing which one committed the affair. And to be honest, without sounding too offensive to anybody, I don't really view that as my business. Solution focused therapy is based upon being curious and not being nosy and knowing the difference between the two, curiosity and being nosy. And if they don't think I need to know, they won't tell me. And my job is to ask questions that bring about the useful data, not the hurtful data. So if someone says, well, there's our relationship, we need to get trust back. Well, my curiosity is, what does your relationship look like when trust is present? As opposed to, how does your relationship, uh, what does your relationship look like when trust is present? As opposed to what things you need to do to rebuild trust. And that would cause us to do the traditional problem solving methods, which do work, by the way. They are effective. There are lots of approaches that involve that type of language. They just take longer and they're not as positive and don't feel as good to the couple when they're doing them. Does that make sense? Wonderful. I saw you have a thumbs up mood. I like it. All right, so we're running pretty low on time. I'm gonna unmute or I'm gonna mute Carol, and as we wrap up here with just a couple of minutes, are there any other questions? Let me see. Carol, did you put your hand up again?
Yeah, typically, how long would you work with a couple using this approach? I know there's no typical, but
Right.
you mentioned that you get to the meat a bit faster.
Yeah, that's true. And again, that's something else demonstrated by research. And it's so funny because we know so much about the solution focused approach with individuals and with groups and with kids in schools. And we know so much less. There's been so little research on using this approach with couples. Um, but the research that we are doing, I'm doing research with Adam Frower in Chicago. I'm doing research with Sarah Smock in at Texas Tech, and the same things that we know about solution focused therapy with individuals are coming true solution focused therapy with couples. In my own practice, there are couples that I see frequently and have seen frequently for a longer period of time, and there are couples that I see just once. Dave and Celeste happens to be a couple that I saw one time, and their outcome was hugely successful. Um, they still contact me and let me know that things are back on track and how happy they are with their relationship. And we only saw them once, or I only saw them this one time. So I don't know what the average is currently. I know that not too long ago I had my assistant contact my clients and go through all my charts and come up with an average number of sessions, and it was less than 3. It was 2.7. And about 80% of the people that we contacted commented that the session was at least moderately helpful on getting them to where they currently are. Most people said it was even more than that, like a traditional Likert scale. It was even more helpful than moderately, but it was at least moderately helpful in getting us uh, right where they are. The Which is exactly what we found when working with individuals. There's an organization in London called Brief, and they don't work with as many couples, even though they see whoever comes to them, and they had almost the exact same responses, but they probably had a little bit fewer sessions. Mine was close to 2.7, and they Chris Iveson had an average number of sessions of less than 2. His was somewhere around 1.8. um, but it really truly is remarkable, and if you can commit to it and really really put yourself in the solution building process, then the outcomes are nothing short of extraordinary, and nothing is more amazing than what happens between session 1 and session 2, if there even is a session 2. So we just have a couple minutes left. Are there any more comments or questions? I'm getting some chat from several people that don't have microphones. So if you guys had any comments or questions, feel free to send me an email, or you can find me on Facebook, and I'll be happy to respond to those questions or comments as easy as I can. And if you guys have any suggestions for some future content you'd like to show, excuse me, like me to use in the webinar, um, and I will be happy to include those things. This process is kind of new for me. I mean, this is my first webinar actually using this particular system. I really like it, actually. Um, but I want to make sure that this is something that's useful to everybody. I want to make sure that we all get what we want to get from it. So I actually just had a comment from somebody through the chat area. And their question is something that I hear quite a lot, is what do you do when you try to be solution focused, but people just want to complain? Now, this is probably a longer answer than I'm going to be able to give here since we only have about a minute and a half to go. Um, but I really think that that happens a lot, especially when you work with couples. There are so many people that come to therapy and they go with the expectation that complaining would be a good thing, that the therapist wants to know more about the problem. But obviously, as solution focused people, we're curious about something totally different. And my suggestion is always to first make sure you start the conversation as opposed to the client. And you have to ask the proper question to begin the conversation. If I accidentally say, "So, how are you guys today?" I'm likely to, accidentally, but I'm likely to invite more problem talk and more complaining. But if I start off by saying, "What are your best hopes from this conversation?" then people begin by doing something other than complaining because I immediately let them know I'm interested in something else. And there's a dynamic that takes place when people eventually realize, oh, he's interested in something not related to my complaining. And they eventually reduce the amount of complaining that they do and just start answering the questions. And one thing I've noticed is I've never had anybody say, not one time in all my years of doing this, no one has ever said, "Hey, I like these questions, but I want to go back to talking about the problem." People don't say that because, look, we're 8 minutes, 9 minutes into this conversation, and look at what's happening already with Dave and Celeste. So, Dave and Celeste, if one of them had the idea of complaining, as I would argue Dave did in the very beginning of this session, they don't want to undo the good feelings that they currently have, and they want to keep the process going. So I guess the short answer would be, actually, I'm going to write this down because that would be a good thing to make sure that we cover in our next webinar. But the short answer would be just stick with the solution focused language, and the positive impact of that process will allow the couples to kind of follow along and do less complaining because they're not going to want to do the negative damage to their relationship. Um, so I hope that was a good answer for the person that sent that comment via the chat. And like I said, I'm going to write that down because there's so much. I have a video of a client. It's an individual client, but the process is still quite the same when you work with individuals as couples. But it's an individual who is complaining a lot. And it takes me, we had to go through a little bit of a question answer process for her to realize kind of what I was doing. And if I had the time, I'd like to show that video as an example of that to address that question. But it's a question I get a lot. But like I said, I'm going to write it down and make sure we cover it next month. Um, Before I let you guys go, I want to remind you that next month's webinar is Central. I don't think we're on Standard Time anymore. I think we're on Daylight Time, Central Daylight Time, which will be May 6th at noon Central Daylight Time. So I want to thank everybody for participating in our webinar today. And if you guys found this helpful, please share it with your friends and colleagues. And if you have any comments or questions or suggestions, please feel free to send me an email or send me. You can find me on Facebook. However you need to get a hold of me, I'm happy to address these questions. And I really appreciate you guys being part of our call today and being part of the Connie Institute, getting our message that solution building processes work in session. So thank you guys all so much, and I look forward to interacting with you in the future. Have a good day and goodbye.